The high desert wind carried the smell before Daniel Reed even saw the wreck. It was the kind of wind that came down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in late October, dry, sharp, and edged with the promise of winter. Daniel guided his buckskin gelding, Sully, toward the shallow arroyo where the vultures circled. He wasn't looking for trouble. In New Mexico territory, however, trouble grew like weeds. The wagon was a ruin, canvas scorched, one wheel shattered, mules dead in their traces with their throats cut. Flour and beans spilled across the dirt like pale blood. 2 bodies lay in the dust, mission men judging by their black coats and stiff collars. But it wasn't Apache work. Apaches would have taken the mules. Bandits. Probably drunk ones. Daniel swept the ridge with his eyes, rifle ready, but the killers were long gone. Then he heard it, a sound so thin it barely existed, half scrape, half whimper. Something weak, something in pain. He followed it to the back of the wagon, and he froze. A young Apache woman was chained to the rear axle like livestock, barefoot, bleeding, half conscious. Her ankle was raw from the iron cuff, and a split in her forehead had dried into a crusted mask of blood. She flinched when his shadow touched her. She scrambled back instinctively, but the chain jerked her short, digging into her flesh. The terror in her dark eyes was deeper than fear. It was memory. Daniel lowered his rifle immediately. "Easy," he murmured. His voice was rough, barely used. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. He backed away from her and took a slow breath. He had seen bruises like hers before, old ones fading yellow, fresh ones blooming purple. The preacher had not been saving her soul. Daniel set his rifle aside and brought her his canteen, taking a sip himself first so she could see it was safe. He placed it within reach and moved back. She grabbed it with shaking fingers and drank like someone who hadn't tasted water in days. When she dropped the empty canteen, he knelt by the axle. "This'll make some noise," he warned softly, more to himself than her. He began filing the chain. Every scrape made her flinch. Every spark of metal made her tremble. Under the full weight of the sun, his hands blistered, his knuckles scraped, and the file grew hot. But he kept going. And finally, snap! The chain broke. She stared at the severed link, as if the idea of being unchained didn't make sense. As if freedom were a word she didn't recognize. "Can you stand?" he asked. No answer. When he reached toward her, she curled into herself, shaking violently. He sighed, got up, turned his back deliberately, and walked to his saddlebags. He wasn't stupid. He knew how she saw him. A white man. A man with weapons. A man like the others who had hurt her. He placed jerky and a blanket on the dirt several feet away from her reach. Then he sat on a rock 20 feet off and waited. He waited while the sun dipped lower, while the shadows stretched, while she finally, slowly, painfully got to her feet. She stood unsteadily, small, thin, but upright. He got on his horse and looked at her. "You come with me, you live," he said. "You stay here, you won't see morning." He wasn't being cruel, just honest. For a long moment, she stood in the dying light, staring at the dead men, the desert, the sky. Then, without a word, she limped toward him. He lifted her on his Sully's saddle as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing. Wrapped in the blanket, trembling like a leaf, she leaned rigidly against his chest as he turned the horse toward the mountains. "You're safe," he whispered into her hair. But his voice wasn't clear whether he was telling her or himself. Not a sound left her lips the entire way home. Daniel's homestead sat hidden in a narrow valley where the pines gave way to aspen and spruce. A lonely place. A place built for a man who didn't want to be found. He lifted the Apache girl, carefully, from the saddle, her skin ice cold despite the blanket. She didn't fight him. She didn't trust him. She simply had nothing left. Inside the cabin, he set her on the only chair near the dead fireplace. The cabin was small. One room, a cot, a table, a few shelves of tins and tools, a rifle rack bolted high, a place built by a man who no longer expected company. Her eyes darted everywhere, not in curiosity, in calculation, a trapped animal mapping every exit. "My name's Daniel," he said quietly. "Daniel Reed." He lit the fire, filling the cabin with flickering warmth. Her gaze never left him. "You're hurt," he said gently, making a pot of warm water. "Let me clean the cut." When he approached with the cloth, she raised her arms as if to shield her face, a reflex born from cruelty. "Easy," he said. "Just water." He worked slowly, giving her time to recoil if she needed to. The cut was shallow but filthy. She hissed softly as he cleaned it. Her fever was rising, her skin too warm, her breath too fast. He cooked a thin cornmeal gruel with molasses. She stared at the bowl like it might betray her. When he set it down and backed away, she ate in desperate, shaking mouthfuls. Night settled outside, and the wind howled like a hungry beast. "You can take the cot," Daniel said, pointing. "I'll take the floor." Her reaction was immediate, fear. She shook her head sharply. He realized. The cot was inside. The door had one latch, and he was a man. She bolted outside into the freezing dark. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing a blanket. She huddled on the porch, arms around her knees, shivering so violently it looked painful. Her bare feet were already turning red from the cold. "You'll die out here," he said. "It'll snow before sunrise." Her eyes begged him, "Don't trap me in a room with you." He didn't force her. He didn't drag her. He simply draped the blanket over her shoulders. Then he returned inside and left the door cracked. He kept the fire burning and slept in his chair, boots on, rifle close. He didn't sleep long. By midnight, she was coughing. By dawn, she wasn't waking. When he touched her cheek, it was cold as stone. She was burning up from fever and freezing from exposure. He didn't ask permission. He carried her inside, laid her in the cot, covered her with every blanket he owned, and stoked the fire until the room glowed hot. For 4 days, she fought the fever. For 4 days, he did not sleep more than an hour at a time. Her nightmares were violent. She screamed in Apache, fought invisible hands, kicked at ghosts. Daniel held her shoulders gently, whispering, "You're safe. You're safe. No one's here. Just rest." On the morning of the 5th day, the fever broke. He awoke to find her watching him. Her eyes clearer, calmer, suspicious but alive. He exhaled, relief hitting him harder than any bullet. But she still didn't trust the cabin. So he rebuilt the back porch. He spent 3 days enclosing it with timber, sealing cracks with mud and straw, building a small fireplace of river stone. He moved the cot inside, a separate room, a door that opened outside, a latch on the inside. When he showed it to her, he pointed to the latch. "Yours," he said. "You lock it." She touched the latch slowly. That night, he heard it slide into place. And for the first time since he'd found her, she slept without fever. The first snow came early that year. It fell in slow, quiet sheets, softening the whole valley under a white hush. Daniel chopped wood from sunrise to sundown, knowing winter in the high country wasn't kind to anyone, least of all 2 people living on the edge of the world. She watched him from the door of her small porch room, her shawl wrapped tight around her thin shoulders. She didn't step closer, not yet, but she didn't hide either. That was something. And then, one morning, Daniel felt her. He didn't hear her, didn't see her approach. He only sensed her presence. When he turned, she stood 20 feet away in the snow, staring at the axe in his hands. And she didn't hide. One evening, when the wind screamed outside and the cold pushed against the walls like a living thing, she approached the main cabin fire. She didn't enter the room. She only knelt near the threshold, letting the warmth brush her hands. Daniel looked up from mending a bridle. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You can come in. Fire's bigger in here." Her eyes flicked to him, then to the door behind her, then back to him. She stepped inside. One small step. She didn't come closer. She didn't sit, but she didn't flee either. For the first time, the cabin didn't feel like a place for one. It felt like a place holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. Then came the night her fear changed. The storm outside was brutal. Snow slammed the walls. The wind howled like wolves, fighting the dark. Daniel brought her into the main cabin because her porch room was too cold for the worst of winter. She sat on the floor near the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the flames like they were the safest thing she knew. Daniel sat across from her, mending a broken stirrup in the lantern glow. He worked quietly until he saw her move. She crawled toward him, slow, cautious, like a deer approaching a stream. She stopped beside his chair. Daniel froze. She reached out, just 2 fingers, and touched the scar on the back of his hand, the one he always tried to ignore, the one a Confederate iron had left before he deserted the war. Her touch was feather soft, curious, not frightened, not meek, just wondering. Daniel swallowed hard. "It's old," he said quietly. She traced the pale line again, her brows drawn in concentration. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft, broken, but clear. "Why, your heart sleep alone?" Daniel felt something in his chest shift, painful, sudden, deep. He didn't answer. He couldn't. His dead wife's face flashed in the firelight of his memory. The silence of a child who'd lived only one breath. The 5 years of loneliness that had buried him alive. He pulled his hand back gently. "It's late," he murmured. "You should sleep." She hesitated, studied him. Then she rose and returned to her porch room. He heard the latch slide into place. Daniel sat in the silence she left behind. He didn't sleep that night. Not really. He stood by the window, feeling the weight of her question like a stone in his ribs. "Why does your heart sleep alone?" He didn't know the answer. But for the first time since the day he buried his family, he wondered what it would be like if it didn't. The first real snow of the season came without warning. Jonas woke to a silence so deep it felt like another world. The storm from the night before had buried the basin in white. The pines sagged under heavy blankets of snow. His cabin roof crackled under the weight. Jonas sat at the table, tightening the leather on a set of snowshoes, his breath fogging the air. Across the room, Sonny sat cross-legged near the hearth, mending the torn sleeve of one of his shirts by firelight. Their silence had changed. When he first brought her here, the silence had been fear. Raw fear. Then, through routine, it became caution. Now it was something else. A shared winter space. A quiet belonging neither had asked for, but both were settling into. Jonas didn't know when it happened. Maybe when she learned to split kindling. Maybe when she moved into the small porch room he built just for her. Maybe when she began eating at his table instead of the doorway. But now, the silence felt warm instead of sharp. Sonny bridged it first. She looked up from her stitching, pointed at his hands, at the scar across his knuckles, a pale ridge left from some fight years behind him. "Storm hands," she murmured. Jonas blinked. "What?" She tapped her own chest, then pointed at him again. "One who fights storms." His breath caught a little. It wasn't praise. It was observation. Truth. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. He stood instead, walking to the woodpile stacked beside the hearth. "I'll bring him more pine before it gets dark," he said, reaching for his coat. A soft sound made him pause. She had risen to her feet, slow, unsure, but determined, and stepped into his path. Her fingers touched the sleeve of his shirt. Light, barely a whisper. She wasn't stopping him. She was asking something. He didn't understand what until she lifted his hand, turning it gently palm up. Her eyes followed the lines. She traced them with a single finger, her touch feather soft. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Your heart alone?" Jonas froze. No one, not in 5 long years, had asked him anything that touched the buried parts of his life. He swallowed. "It's just how it turned out." "Storm took someone?" she asked. He nodded once, unable to speak. The fire popped softly between them. She released his hand, but not the question lingering in the air. "You bury her here?" she asked. "Up on the ridge," Jonas said. "Under the pine." She and the child. Sonny absorbed the words with no shock, no pity, just a deep, listening stillness. Then she stepped aside, letting him pass. He brought in the wood, set the last logs by the fire, and turned to find Sonny watching him again. Not afraid, not guarded, but seeing him, really seeing him. He lowered himself into his chair, the stiffness in his chest loosening for the first time in years. Snow pressed against the window. The wind hummed low in the chimney. The cabin felt small but not tight. Warm, but not stifling. For the first time since the graves on the ridge covered over, Jonas felt something other than grief. The beginning of trust. That night the wind rose. By dusk, it clawed at the cabin walls like a living thing. The storm had teeth. Jonas had seen winters in Pine Ridge Basin, but this one was early and mean. Snow blew hard and sideways, rattling the shutters. He checked the door twice, stoked the fire high, put sandbags by the sill. Sonny's small room. The enclosed porch was too cold tonight. "You'll sleep inside," he said. She hesitated, eyes lowering to the floorboards. "It's warm here. Safer. I'll take the chair." Still she didn't move. He realized what she feared. The door. The single entrance. No way out if she needed one. He stepped back from the cot, clearing space. "You can bolt the door from your side. I won't touch it." Her gaze flicked between the cot and him. The storm howled. Something thundered overhead, maybe a falling branch. Slowly, she crossed the room. She sat on the cot, blanket in her lap, back straight, watching him like a deer watching a clearing. Jonas settled into his chair, pulling his coat around him. The fire warmed his legs. The storm rattled the shutters again. She flinched at the noise. He kept his voice low. "It'll pass." But she didn't look at the window. She looked at him. "I'm not afraid, Storm," she whispered. "Afraid, man in storm." He went very still. Her eyes were on the fire, not him. Her hands trembled in the blanket. "Men hurt me," she said. "Cold hurt." "Same." Jonas' throat tightened. The storm outside had nothing on the storm in her eyes. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice soft. "I'm not them." She looked at him then, and something broke, a small frozen piece loosening. The silence stretched. Long, heavy, honest. Then lightning cracked, so loud it shook the roof. Sonny bolted upright, panic rising fast. Her breath came sharp, quick. Her hands curled in the blanket. Jonas instinctively reached out, but stopped himself halfway. She saw the halted gesture. Something inside her shifted. Slowly, trembling, she moved toward him. One step, then another, until she stood before him, small and shaking. She touched his sleeve again. Not fear, seeking safety. He opened the blanket, draped over him without a word. She slipped into the space against him. A breath, a shiver, a soft exhale as her forehead rested lightly against his shoulder. Jonas pulled the blanket around her, careful, gentle. The storm battered the cabin, but inside the world stilled. Her breathing slowed. His heartbeat steadied. Trust wasn't spoken. It wasn't asked for. It simply formed like snow settling quiet on the roof. And when her trembling finally stopped, Jonas realized something true and terrifying. He was no longer alone. The storm finally passed in the pale blue light of dawn. By midday, the pines shook off their heavy coats of snow. The sky cleared, hard and bright. Jonas stepped outside to check the trapline, leaving Sonny inside with the fire. She stood at the doorway, wrapped in his old wool coat, watching him move across the frozen basin. Something had changed between them the night before, quiet but undeniable. He didn't touch her with romance. She didn't touch him with fear, but the space between them felt warm now. Shared, claimed. He returned at dusk, carrying 2 rabbits frozen stiff. Sonny took them silently, her small hands working the sinew cord with more confidence than weeks ago. Their rhythm had become seamless. That night, she hummed low while roasting the meat. Jonas listened. He didn't know the melody, but the sound anchored him. It could have been the beginning of peace. But peace in New Mexico territory was a fragile thing. Always temporary. Always hunted. 3 days after the storm, danger arrived. Jonas saw the dust column first. On the far ridge. A faint rising smear against the winter sky. He stiffened. Riders. 3, no, 4. He stepped back from the window. Slow. Controlled. But the dread pulsed hot in his veins. He didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. Men from the world he had left behind. Men who didn't forget insults. Men who didn't forgive a white man living with an Apache woman. He checked the rifle, loaded. He checked the revolver. 6 rounds, clean. Sonny watched him with wide, alert eyes. Bad men, she asked softly. Could be. He didn't sugarcoat. She deserved truth. He dug into the shelf where he kept spare cartridges and shoved them into his coat. Sonny stepped close, her hand brushing his arm. "I fight too," she whispered. "You hide," he said gently but firm. "They'd harm you first." She bristled, a small fire rising in her dark eyes. "I not pray. I know." He held her gaze. "But if something happens to me, you run. Do you understand?" Her throat bobbed. She didn't like it, but she nodded. He slipped out the back and moved silently through the pines, taking the ridge trail toward the bluff above the cabin. Footsteps that once belonged to a soldier now belonged to a protector. He saw them clearly now. 4 riders. Cold faces. Hard eyes. Weapons carried openly. Men looking for trouble. Men certain they'd find it. Jonas felt a steady calm settle over him, the kind that came before battle. He had no desire to kill, but he would. For her. The men rode straight into the yard. Sonny stood in the doorway, coat pulled tight, face expressionless, just as Jonas told her. The big man in front, a thick-set brute with a scar splitting his eyebrow, spat in the snow. "Well now," he drawled. "Reckon the stories were true." Another man snickered. "Look at that." The mountain ghost took himself a little Apache wife. Sonny didn't flinch. The scarred rider leaned forward. "Where's Jonas Ward?" Hidden on the ridge, rifle steady, Jonas exhaled slow. Sonny lifted her chin. Not a girl anymore. Not prey. "Why here?" she asked. The men laughed like she told a joke. Scarbrow sneered. "We came looking for what's ours." He took what ain't his to keep. Her hands curled at her sides. "This my home," she said. "That's so," he mocked. "Well, your home is sitting on Reed family land, girl. We got claim, and we got law on our side." Jonas' pulse punched hard. The Reed family, a name from the valley's past, long before he came, claiming rights to land they'd abandoned years ago. This wasn't random. This wasn't rumor. This was a takeover. Scarbrow spread his glove hands wide. "Law says the girl goes back to the mission. The land? To us." The man beside him laughed mean. "Figure Ward won't mind, long as he ain't alive to complain." Sonny's breath hitched, just once. That was enough. Jonas fired. The crack split the winter air, echoing off stone. The man to Scarbrow's left dropped out of the saddle before he even understood he'd been hit. The horses reared, snow flying. Scarbrow twisted in shock. Up on a ridge. He raised his rifle. Too slow. Jonas shot again. The second bullet knocked the weapon from Scarbrow's grasp, splintering the stock and tearing across the man's shoulder. Blood spattered the snow. Jonas moved. Silent. Swift. Predatory. He reloaded behind a fallen pine trunk. The remaining 2 men scrambled behind their horses for cover. One shouted, panicked, "We was told he was alone." "He ain't alone," Scarbrow growled, clutching his bleeding arm. "He's got her. That little savage taught him to fight dirty." That made Jonas see red. Cold. Blinding. Another shot rang out, Sonny. She had moved inside, taken the spare rifle from under the cot, and fired from the cabin doorway. Her bullet hit the snow inches from a rider's boot. Not perfect, but a warning. Jonas grinned under his breath. Not prey. He vaulted over the log and sprinted down the slope, boots hitting snow in silent bursts. He heard a horse scream. He heard curses. He smelled gunpowder. He slid behind the water trough as a bullet tore into the wooden rail above his shoulder. "Ward!" Scarbrow roared. "You're a dead man." Jonas rose from cover and fired the last round of his rifle. The slug hit Scarbrow's thigh, knocking him sideways off his horse. He hit the snow with a howl. The last rider panicked, dropped his weapon, fled full gallop down the canyon, not looking back. Silence settled, breathless, steam rising from the dead man's blood, wind whispering through the pines. Jonas stepped out from behind the trough, his breath frosting in the air. Scarbrow writhed in the snow, hands red, teeth bared. "You'll answer for this," he hissed. Jonas cocked his revolver. "You answer now." But before he could raise the hammer, Sonny moved between them. Her chest heaved. Her eyes blazed. "No," she said quietly. "Enough dying." Jonas lowered the gun. Scarbrow stared up at her, at the woman he had mocked. Now he feared her more than the gun. She pointed toward the trail. "You crawl away. Tell others." This homestay's ours. The man obeyed. He crawled, stumbled, fell, and vanished down the ridge, leaving a red trail in the snow. Jonas watched until he disappeared. Sonny stood beside him, her shoulders squared. He looked at her. She looked back. Not girl, not guest, partner. The world had come for them. Together, they sent it home bleeding. The sun dipped low, turning the winter basin gold. Jonas and Sonny stood over the blood-stained snow where the battle had ended. The cold wind carried the scent of pine and iron. For a long moment, neither spoke. The mountain was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, but before the consequences arrive. Jonas wiped the blood from his sleeve and finally looked at her. You saved my life, he said softly. Sonny shook her head. You saved mine first. No. Today, you stood between me and a bullet. She turned her face away, but her voice trembled. I stand with you. Those words hit deeper than he expected. He stepped closer, slow, as if not to startle a wild creature. But Sonny didn't move back. Her breath fogged in the cold, mixing with his. You shouldn't have had to stand at all, Jonas murmured. I choose, she whispered. Not because I must, but because I want. The truth between them hung in the air like warm breath on winter glass. The night after, Jonas wouldn't let her sleep alone that night. Not because she was afraid she wasn't, but because he was. He built up the fire until the whole cabin glowed amber. Sonny sat on the edge of the bed, brushing melted snow from her hair, watching him with soft eyes that saw more than he ever said aloud. More men will come, she said. I know. From Reed family. From town. From world outside. She looked down at her hands. World always comes. Always takes. Jonas sat beside her. Sonny, listen to me. His voice was rough, but gentle. No one takes you from here. Not while I'm breathing. She lifted her head. But if I stay, you will fight forever. He exhaled slow. If you leave, I'll still fight forever. And if we go, her voice was barely above a whisper. He froze. He hadn't considered leaving. Not the cabin. Not the mountain. Not the small, hard piece he'd carved from the world. But then he looked at her, the way she held fear and fire in the same eyes, and he realized something he'd never allowed himself to feel. He wasn't tied to the mountain. He was tied to her. Where would we go? He asked. South, she said. Toward warm land. Toward my people's valley. They're not all gone. Some still live by river. Jonas' heart tightened. Will they take me in? Sonny studied him for a long moment. You help. You protect. You listen. They see that, they take you. She reached out, brushing the edge of his jaw with trembling fingers. You carry grief, she whispered. I carry mine. Maybe we heal together. Jonas shut his eyes. That simple touch burned through the walls he'd carried for years. Before dawn, they packed at first light. Not everything, just what mattered, food, the old rifle, a blanket Sonny had mended with her own hands. A pouch of herbs, she said, would keep sickness away. Jonas saddled the horse while she stood in the snow, watching the sky turn pink. You ever seen the Riverlands? She asked. No, it's beautiful, she whispered. Green after rain, quiet in summer, smells like sage and warm earth. She paused. I want to show you. He climbed into the saddle and extended a hand. Then take me there. She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her up behind him. Her arms circled his waist. Her forehead rested between his shoulder blades. For the first time since he'd arrived in these mountains, Jonas Ward felt peace. But peace never travels alone. The riders returned. They were halfway down the ridge when Jonas heard it. Distant hooves. The metallic rattle of rifles. Men shouting orders. He turned in the saddle, jaw tightening. A new party of 10 riders emerged from the pines, armed, organized, and angry. Reed family reinforcements. Sonny gripped his coat. They come fast, and they were, cutting across the basin, pushing hard to intercept them before the canyon trail. Jonas pulled the reins. We go. The horse lunged forward, snow spraying around them. Sonny held tight, head pressed to his back. Shots cracked. Snow burst near the horse's hooves. But Jonas didn't turn back. He leaned forward, voice sharp and steady. Hold on. They raced through the pines, weaving between trunks, dodging fallen branches. Jonas rode like the mountain taught him. Fast, smart, precise. Behind them, the riders struggled to keep pace. One horse slipped on ice and went down. Another rider fell behind, trying to reload. They reached the canyon trail, narrow, winding, deadly. But halfway through it, the path narrowed to a cliff edge. Sonny whispered, terrified, "They know this place." "We do not." "I don't need to know it," Jonas growled. "I just need to trust this horse." He kicked hard. The horse leapt across a frozen gap, barely clearing it. For a split second, all three of them hung over emptiness. Then, hooves hit solid rock. Sonny let out a sharp, broken breath and buried her face against his back. Behind them, the first rider tried to follow and fell. The scream faded into the canyon. The others pulled back, terrified. Jonas didn't slow until the canyon widened and the land opened into a stretch of winter valley. Sonny pressed her cheek against his spine. "You save us," she whispered. He shook his head. "We saved each other." The Riverlands. They reached the valley after sunset. The snow thinned. The air grew warmer. A thin silver river cut through the land, glowing under the rising moon. Sonny slid off the horse, stepping toward the water with trembling hands. "This," she breathed, "is home." The wind lifted her hair. Her boots sank into soft mud. Jonas watched her, her silhouette against the river, her quiet disbelief, her soft, hopeful smile. He dismounted and stood beside her. "What now?" he asked. She looked up at him. "We live." She reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation, their fingers woven together, not out of fear, not out of grief. Choice. A quiet, steady choice. The future didn't arrive with gunfire. It didn't come in the shape of danger or loss. It came in the sound of river water, in the warmth of her hand, in the simple truth that he had someone, and she had him. Jonas exhaled slow. "I'm ready," he whispered. Sonny leaned into him, her voice soft as the river's song. "We go forward together." And under the first stars of new night they did.